All right, how you guys doing? Um, so what we're gonna do is a series of short, hopefully 10-minute lectures on each of the categories of disorders. I don't know which ones you guys have covered, which ones you would like more time on, so we'll start here. We'll start right at the top. Youth onset disorders. The two youth onset disorders, ADHD and autism, who we'll be talking about. ADHD is a disorder that's diagnosed in young people. Most disorders are not diagnosed in young people. They're only diagnosed in adults because it takes time to become crazy. But with these two disorders, they come on as youth. So with ADHD has three parts. The first part is attention span. You need a lack of attention span. You need a short attention span. Now, that is a attention span compared to other individuals your age. A 6-year-old is going to have a short attention span compared to a 10-year-old. So you need a short attention span for a 6-year-old if you're 6. They have basic measures for that, how long a kid should be able to do certain things at a certain age. And when you can't do that, that might show a short attention span. Second is impulsivity, which means you're impulsive. You don't think before you act. Those kids act out not in bad behavior ways. They just act out in terms of not thinking before they do things. And then the third is hyperactivity. Hyperactivity is actually optional. You don't have to have it. You can be diagnosed with ADHD without hyperactivity. But it's usually seen in most kids with ADHD. Hyperactivity, once again, there's activity. There's being normal, active as a child, but then there's overactive. It's a kid who can't stop moving. It's a kid who gets up and walks around the room. When a kid, that's one of the big things that you see, is a kid who gets up and walks around the room, or they walk over and they start doing stuff they shouldn't be doing because they have a short attention span, so they're not doing what they should be doing. They've already got bored with it. Second, they don't think before they act. The rest of you would be in class going, why is that kid doing that? But that kid doesn't think about it first. They just go and do. And then they're moving around more than a normal kid would be hyperactive. In order to be diagnosed with ADHD, you also have to be diagnosed in 3 separate areas. You need to be diagnosed by the psychiatrist that you go to see, your psychologist, who sees those two to 3 things. You need to be diagnosed at home, and you need to show those symptoms at home, and you also need to show those symptoms at school. Usually what happens is a kid goes to school, their parents know that they do these things, but it's just a normal 5-year-old kid. They go to kindergarten, they're usually pretty good in kindergarten because it's only 3-hour school, you don't really spend a lot of time doing stuff. And it's usually first grade when kids start showing signs, between first and third grade usually, where the expectation for a longer attention span, the expectation of less impulsive behavior as you learn how to behave in class. If you keep doing it, then that's when you start noticing. And it usually gets diagnosed at school. Parents say, hey, you need to watch your kid. You need to look out for this. Then they take the kid to a psychologist. Psychologist will ask the parents to then watch the kid and notice certain things. Actually, there's a paper that you actually fill out that says, okay, what's my kid like at home? And then you have a teacher fill it out. You have the psychologist fill it out. You put it all together. If you have it in all areas, if you have 2 of the 3, specifically attention span and impulsivity, then you can be diagnosed with ADHD without hyperactivity. And then if you have the hyperactivity, then it's ADHD. Autism. Autism is an interesting disorder. They have what's called the autism spectrum. Instead of diagnosing somebody with autism, because there's so many different forms of autism, they just diagnose you along the spectrum of very mild to severe. Now, autism is a developmental disorder. Write that down. Developmental disorder. Developmental means that we all develop basically the same way. We all develop words about the same age. We move the same age in terms of crawling or sitting up or walking or running. We learn basic interactions with people in terms of emotional interactions with people at the same age. Kids who have autism don't learn those things necessarily as fast. Specifically, it's the social interactions that they struggle with. A normal baby will look at a person's face 200 times a minute. They'll move their eyes around a face. They'll look at the eyes, they'll look at the nose, they'll look at the lips, and they're constantly looking at facial expressions. Kids with autism don't look at people's faces. So they don't pick up on those social cues, the body language that younger kids do. Well, those younger kids, when they see that, they then mimic it. They have what are called mirror neurons that learn that behavior and then just shoot it right back. The autistic kid doesn't do that, and so they don't have interpersonal skills, and they're developmentally delayed that way. That's the number one thing you see is interpersonal skill delay. You'll also see, sometimes you'll see movement delay. Sometimes you'll see things like the speech delay, because they don't care to interact, because they don't care about the social aspects of things. Then they don't learn to speak as early either. Now, let's talk about the spectrum. You have people that are so autistic. One young lady that I knew, she didn't speak. She was 18 years old. She didn't have any vocal language. She would vocalize, but she didn't have speak at all. She touched people, like she would hug, but she wouldn't let anybody else touch her. She would lean against, like I was sitting on the couch one time, she came and leaned against me, but she wouldn't let me like lean against her or give her a hug or anything. She had limits. She never looked you in the face. She always looked around you instead of looking right at you. Probably what it looks like with me looking at this camera, since I'm oftentimes looking at the computer screen following my lecture and never really looking at that camera. Kind of moderate cases, you'll have people who will speak and interact, but they won't speak and interact in a normal way because they're thinking in their own head. They lack facial expressions that we would normally make. They might act out. A lot of times they get angry because people aren't doing what they expect them to do, and they don't have that frontal lobe kind of emotional control that the rest of us have worked on so that we can live in society. They don't worry about it. That's not a worry for them, and so they don't have that. All the way up to what used to be called Asperger's. Asperger's was like the lowest level, most mild form of autism. They've now gotten rid of it, and it's just part of the spectrum. And those are people who basically are almost perfectly normal in their interactions. They're just weird, but it starts off, they're like that early on. They're usually the same things. They're developmental delays, usually with social things. But it's just a kid who's a little bit behind, just doesn't quite know why not to do certain things versus why they should do other things. And I've had lots of kids in class with Asperger's. There was a kid a couple of years ago, I don't know if you guys remember him. His name was IJ. He always wore a green polo shirt. He always wore dark sunglasses in school. The reason he did that is because he didn't look at people. And he put the sunglasses on. He'd never look anybody in the face, but he'd turn his face right at you. He'd look right at you with the sunglasses on. But you didn't know because, you thought he was looking right at you, but he wasn't. He was looking around. And it made him seem more normal. He didn't seem really normal. He wore the same green shirt every day. He had like 20 pairs, he told me one time. And just things like that were very, very normal. Now, before we're done with this one, I want to suggest a book to you. There's a great book called A Curious Incident of a Dog in the Nighttime. A Curious Incident of a Dog in the Nighttime. It's a book written from the point of view of an autistic boy about this experience with a dog in the nighttime. It's awesome. It's wonderful. It's life-changing. You really feel like you understand autism just a little bit after reading that book. All right, that's Youth Onset Disorders, guys. Thanks. All right. Second one, let's talk about somatization disorders or somatoform disorders. Somatoform means brain-body. So if you have a somatoform disorder, you have a brain-body disorder. What that basically means is you have some physical symptoms. You're sick. You have a problem. You can go to the doctor. You could get diagnosed. What they're going to find out is that it's not a virus. It's not a bacteria. It's not something that you ate. It's a mental problem that's manifesting physical symptoms. They're called somatization disorders. Now, they're basically a bunch of different somatization disorders. Anything that you make yourself sick is a somatization disorder. The one kind of big one that we're going to talk about that's a specifically somatization disorder is called conversion disorder. Conversion disorder is when you have stress in your life. And that stress manifests not as a high blood pressure. It might manifest high blood pressure, but really you see physical symptoms. My favorite example is my Aunt Carolyn. Now let him videotape of this and put it on the internet. I'm a little bit worried that she's going to see it and she's going to be offended. But I'm sorry, Carolyn. It's a true story. So anyhow, Carolyn got married, had a problem. Her husband cheated on her. He was a college professor. cheated with one of his students. She got divorced. She did not deal with it very well. After a while, she decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to start dating again. So she started dating again. When she started dating, she met a nice guy. They dated. They decided they were going to get married. It was going to be wonderful. They got married. They went on their honeymoon. They've been really good people, not fooling around before they get married or anything. And on their honeymoon, there's a problem. And the problem was that every time her new husband touched her, she broke out in hives. Yeah, that was a bit of a problem. They had the marriage annulled. They were not able to consummate the marriage because consummation took too much touching and it made her itch too bad. The stress of getting remarried, the fear of having another guy cheat on her, whatever it might have been, caused these physical symptoms, these hives to break out all over her body. That's a great example of conversion disorder. In the movies all the time you'll see and you'll hear, if you ever talk to somebody who goes to war, that in war you'll see things that are conversion disorders. People will go blind. People will go deaf. Not because their eyes were injured or their ears were injured, but because their brain is trying to block out some problem. One of the kind of weird ones that's actually really common is called glove conversion, where you lose feeling in your hand somewhere from your elbow down. It's just like it's not there, it's gone. The nerves have stopped process. You can't feel anything anymore. Your mom might feel this if your dad's parents come and stay for 3 weeks. All of a sudden she'll start showing these weird symptoms because she actually doesn't like your dad's parents. And she can't deal with it anymore. But instead of acting out on that and saying something, she suffers from a conversion disorder. All right. Another one that it falls in this category, but it's a little bit different. It's called Munchausen's. Munchausen's is where the person makes themselves sick. They drink things that hurt their body and make them ill, and then they go to the hospital. It's a cry for attention. It's not fully a somatoform disorder, but it falls in this category because it's a mental disorder that you have physical symptoms from. So it falls as a somatoform disorder. But you're causing it. It's not something that your brain is doing. You're causing it. But there's also Munchausen by proxy. I've actually seen this in parents at school, where they make their kids sick because then they get to baby the kid more. It's actually happened with a couple of students in high school. The kids start pulling away from the mother. The mother's so used to spending all of her time doting on her kids. All of a sudden the kids are teenagers. They don't really want to deal with mom anymore. And one day she does something that makes them a little bit sick, and then they're like, Mom, I'm sick, I want you to help me, and she feels all loved and warmed again, and they keep doing it over and over again. Also, there's a great, I don't remember what episode it is, great Law & Order SVU about this. I think it's actually season 1. You can look it up, see if you can find it, but it's an awesome Munchausen by proxy disorder. And then there's a Munchausen one on House. House actually meets a girl that he kind of likes, actually, but she's got Munchausen. She makes herself sick. All right, the last one, and the one you've heard of from the somatoform disorders, is hypochondria. Hypochondriasis is what it's actually called, but we call it hypochondria. Hypochondria is when you have fear of getting sick. It's actually fairly close to being a phobia, which we'll be talking about next time. But it manifests as people thinking they're sick. They usually don't actually show really strong physical symptoms. They think they're showing strong physical symptoms because they're worried about getting sick. Hypochondria manifests in so many different ways. Sometimes they're worried about getting sick to the point where they're germaphobes and they end up with anxiety all the time about the germs. Other times it manifests as somebody says they feel ill and all of a sudden the person with hypochondria has the same thing. There's a great scene in Bandits, the movie Bandits. The whole movie's Billy Bob Thornton is a hypochondriac, and they do a great job of showing what that's like. And there's a scene where John Travolta at the end of the movie makes Billy Bob Thornton think he has a brain tumor because he said his brother had a brain tumor. And he described all the symptoms, and then Billy Bob Thornton said he had all the symptoms. And then the love interest, she goes, he doesn't have a brother. And he's like, he doesn't have a brother. And then he's all better. My favorite example of hypochondria is my wife's family. My wife's family has hypochondria. They're all germaphobes. They're all worried about getting sick. They all get sick a lot. Like once a month, they've been sick for a week with a cold or a flu. Either they have really bad immune systems or they're hypochondriacs. Now, I wasn't sure which one it was. My wife told me maybe it was just they got sick. Maybe it was that just other people lied and said they weren't sick as much as other people. And so one day I decided to run a test. So this is like Christmas time. The whole family got together at my mother-in-law's house. And so before I went, I said, honey, I don't think I'm feeling very good. She went, oh, are you okay? And I'm like, I think I'll be fine. I've just got maybe a little cold, a little sniff, a little cough. So I get to my mother-in-law's house and I go hide in the basement. Watch a little TV, hanging out. And she's upstairs and I hear them upstairs. Somebody goes, where's Sid? And my wife goes, oh, he's downstairs. He's not feeling good. So then, like 1 minute later, I walk upstairs and I walk through the living room that everybody's sitting in. And I just cough. And walk through the room. I sit in the kitchen for like a minute or two, just kind of chilling, killing time. And then I walk back through, and as I walk back through, I sneeze. And then sorry, excuse me. And I go back downstairs. That's all I did. One time, two times, I guess. Once one way, once the other. The next week, both of her sisters called, said their entire families had gotten a cold, just like the one that I had. They actually referenced me and said, oh, they must have caught Sid's sickness. Oh, I can't. And my wife's like, I'm so sorry. I can't believe it. I totally made it up. I wasn't sick. Neither were they. But they're hypochondriacs, and they think anytime you sneeze or anytime you cough, it must be a cold that's going to last for days, and they've got to really fight it off, and they've got to work on it. Anytime they don't feel good, they're like, oh, something's coming on. They're always worried about that. That's hypochondria. Anyhow, hope that helps. We'll talk to you later. All right, this is number 3 in this series of psychological disorders. We're going to talk about anxiety disorders. So, anxiety disorders all suffer from the same thing, anxiety. Now, what is anxiety? That's a good question. You probably should ponder that for a second. What would you consider being anxious, having anxiety? I think butterflies in the stomach. I think a little stressed out, a little shaky maybe. Blood pressure's up, worried. My thoughts are all over the place. Basically, I've felt anxiety for the last few weeks pretty strongly. There are different types of anxiety, and that will then lead to different types of anxiety disorders. So the first one is one I want to talk about. It's not a disorder, but it's what Freud talked about, and I think we've all experienced this. It's called free-floating anxiety. And Freud explained it, it's kind of like a cloud that kind of floats around the room, any room you're in. And have you ever been sitting there in class and you're just kind of chilling, you're not really thinking about things, everything's fine. All of a sudden, just like the cloud floats into you, and all of a sudden you feel anxious and you're like, what's going on? Something's wrong. And you start getting worried, start getting nervous, and then it floats away and then it's gone. And he called it free-floating anxiety because there are times as human beings that we just feel anxious. No real reason for it, it just happens. We don't have complete control of our lives, and so we feel a little anxious. That's not a disorder, that's normal. And that's the key to anxiety disorders. So an anxiety disorder is not I feel anxious, I have a problem. It's that anxiety is normal at normal levels. To feel anxious when things are going wrong in your life, perfectly normal. To feel anxious when you have a major test in AP, whatever it is that you're taking, and you didn't study that before, you decided to spend the night on your PlayStation 4 because you just got the new whatever game it was, and now you didn't study and you're going to fail, and you're probably not going to graduate from high school. You're probably going to end up going to Slick instead of the University of Utah, and your parents are probably going to kill you. Yeah, understandable. Total understandable levels of anxiety. It's when that keeps going or when there's no cause for it. That's where you have anxiety disorders. So the different anxiety disorders. First, what we call generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder is a disorder marked by anxiety for no particular reason at high levels for long periods of time. If you've been feeling really anxious and nervous for that nothing's changed to cause it. Maybe the job you have is stressful, but you've felt higher levels of stress for no reason. Nothing's changed, but you're feeling it more. You're worried more. That, and then it lasts for a month or more. That can be generalized anxiety disorder. People who suffer from anxiety, if they ever say, I suffer from anxiety, they're referring to generalized anxiety disorder. They don't really have a reason for it. It doesn't manifest yet as anything in particular. And so they just feel anxious. Anxiety can actually cause a lot of physical symptoms. blood pressure problems, heart problems. It can make your hair fall, make your hair turn gray. There's a bunch of different physical symptoms that come from anxiety, and so that it's a pretty pronounced disorder. It's something you have to watch for. Usually treated by anti-anxiety drugs, which are often similar to antidepressants. They try and increase the levels of serotonin in the brain and make you feel better. All right, the next one's phobias. Everybody's favorite. Phobias. A phobia is an irrational fear. Now, that's a phobia. We all have phobias. Take a minute, think about your favorite phobias. Maybe have the sub pause this, and you guys can talk about your phobias. What are you scared of? Now, let me just tell you, I don't like sharp things. That's my thing. I don't like sharp things. I don't like razors. I don't like knives. I don't like snakes because they have fangs that are sharp. I don't like spiders because they have fangs that are sharp. I don't like knives. I don't like swords. I don't like any of that stuff. I'm doing better with it, mostly because my wife had 2 C-sections, and I watched them cut her open, reach in and pull a baby out. Yeah, I know, kind of gross. But it fixed me a little bit for that. Doesn't bother me quite as bad anymore. Used to be a problem. I'd cover my eyes during movies. I was 25 years old and covering my eyes during a movie when somebody pulled out a knife. It's awful. That's a phobia. It's not a disorder. It's a phobia. It's a disorder if I can't get shots to go on a trip to Zimbabwe, and because I'm too scared of the needles, or if I can't shave, so I grow a beard because I'm scared of the razor. It becomes a phobia if you have a fear of water, and so you can't shower. Which I have a wrestler. If he's in class, he knows who he is, and he doesn't like water. He just doesn't like it. Doesn't want to shower because he doesn't like water. That becomes a disorder because you can't function normally in society. Remember the 3 things that make something a disorder. We have it's maladaptive, it's deviant, and it causes personal distress. If you don't shower, you're going to stink. That's deviant. It's maladaptive because then you'll never date because nobody wants to date the dude who stinks. And it causes you personal distress because you're walking in the hall and people are crossing away from you and nobody will talk to you. And you're like, why won't anybody talk to me? And then you find out it's because you stink. A fear of water is a little bit weird if it stops you from behaving normally. The thing is, there's lots of phobias like that. People who can't fly on planes. One of my favorite, John Madden football, right? Rides around in a bus. Won't get on a plane. Scared to death of them. And so he would, every week he did Monday Night Football announcing. He would do the Monday Night Football game. And then Tuesday morning, he would get on his bus. And the bus would drive him to wherever the next game was. If the bus happened to cross near his home, he'd go home, see his wife, see his kids. If not, he would just get on the bus and it would go to the next city and then he'd get ready for that game. Everybody else would go to the game, fly home, spend the week with their families, and on Saturdays they would fly out to the next game. He couldn't do that because he couldn't get on a plane because he's afraid of flying. That was a phobic disorder. One of the ones that you'll hear about is agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is a fear of open spaces or fear of crowds. Basically, you can't leave your house. You have a fear of going outside. If you can't go outside, you're going to have problems in your life. And it's called agoraphobia. My wife's best friend's mom has agoraphobia. We were actually just talking about it the other day because she just sold one of the students at Skyline, actually, her car. And when she sold her car, it had like 1,400 miles on it. And I'm like, oh, what year is it? Like a 2012, 2013? They're like, it's a 2002. 12 years she had the car. 1,400 miles is all she put on it because she only went to the store once a week. The store was a mile away, 2 miles a week, basically, with a couple of miles thrown in here and there. 5 miles a week she would drive on average for 12 years. The car is practically brand new even though it's 12 years old because she didn't drive, because she didn't leave the house. When she did leave the house, it was usually somebody else took her. All right, 2 more anxiety disorders. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Let me repeat that. Post-traumatic stress disorder, abbreviated PTSD. PTSD was originally called shell shock. In World War I, people who had been through World War I and been in the trenches and been shelled over and over and over and over again, they would, anytime there was a loud sound, they'd freak out, they'd hit the ground, they'd scream. They'd have nightmares about it. We now call that PTSD. A lot of the servicemen who came back from Vietnam had it, and we got a lot of study into it. Now people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan have it. But you can get it from almost anything. You get it if your house burned down. if you're in a car accident, if you see a car accident, if you saw somebody murdered, there's a lot of things that can cause PTSD. PTSD usually the person feels anxious. They don't feel like they're in control of their life. They have the normal anxiety problems, but they also have flashbacks. They'll have nightmares. And because it's a real thing, it's not like a lot of these other disorders where there's nothing really causing it, or the thing that's causing it is irrational, like a phobia. But there's actually a real reason. I mean, if you were getting shot at for 3 months in Afghanistan, and you came home and every time you heard a sound that sounded like a gunshot, you freaked out, that's probably pretty normal. So it's actually really, really hard to treat because it's not an irrational behavior. It's a perfectly normal behavior that has been taken out of context. All right, the last one, OCD. I wanted to do this some justice. I don't think I'm going to have time. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, things you need to know about OCD. OCD has two parts, the O and the C. The O is obsessive, C is compulsive. What the O stands for, obsessive, is your thoughts. You obsess about things. You can't let things go. Now, we're all a little obsessed about certain things. There's things that we just can't let go of. That's not abnormal. There's also things we're compulsive about. Compulsive is behavior. Behaviors that you do over and over and over again. Let's say you can't walk in the bathroom without washing your hands. That's a compulsive behavior. Good, thank you. Please wash your hands. But it's compulsive. It's the disorder comes when the two go together. You feel anxiety, and the way you deal with that anxiety is that you obsess about things. And if the more you obsess about it, the more anxious you become. And the only way you can deal with that anxiety that comes from those obsessive thoughts is by the compulsive actions, doing them over and over and over again. So a normal one, somebody has hypochondria, they're afraid of germs, so the way that they're just always thinking about germs and where germs are and how germs are going to hurt them and come after them, make them sick, so they start cleaning everything, or they wash their hands over and over and over again. There's a movie called As Good as It Gets. As Good as It Gets. Awesome movie. Jack Nicholson is great in it. He has OCD. The very first opening scene of the movie, you totally see what OCD is. It's a great example of a hypochondriac OCD. There's lots of things you can be OCD about. Different people have different ways of expressing OCD. People will say, I have OCD. No, they don't. What they have is they're obsessive compulsive. They have obsessive compulsive behavior that they do over and over. That's perfectly normal. All of us actually have obsessive compulsive behaviors. It's when it becomes a disorder. Remember, the three things for a disorder. You have 1, it's maladaptive. 2, it's deviant. And 3, it causes you personal distress. If your behavior makes so you can't live in the normal world and people are making fun of you, or you can't go outside, or you can't do certain things, if it makes it harder for you to live your life and people are noticing it and people are like, well, okay, you're weird. Why do you do that? Okay, stop doing that. Please don't do that. And then lastly, it bothers you and you wish you could stop, but you can't. That's OCD. All right, that's it. Thanks. All right. The next part in our series of psychological disorders and category psychological disorders is mood disorders. Mood disorders. You have a bad mood. That's what a mood disorder is. You have a mood that is inappropriate for an extended period of time. Now, there's basically 2 moods that are inappropriate because they're the only ones that last for long periods of time. Yes, you can be anxious, but that falls in anxiety disorders. And that is depressed and manic. So let's talk about depression. What we call unipolar depression. Unipolar meaning you only go one direction. Poles, 2 opposite poles. Manic being the other pole. So unipolar depression, you suffer from depression. You feel depressed. Now, in order to be diagnosed as a disorder, it's got to be deviant. Now, if your girlfriend were to come up to you, dudes, and say, hey, by the way, I love you so much, but I love your best friend more. He's way better looking than you, and he's a better kisser, and I'm sorry, he's got a nicer car than you do. And you go and cry your eyes out for 5 or 6 days. Perfectly normal. Okay, maybe not perfectly normal, but understandable. Okay, maybe not even understandable. Whatever it is. You have a reason for being depressed. That's not a disorder. Now, if that were to last 6 months or a year from that, that might be getting into that abnormal phase. If you have no reason to be depressed, if your life is perfect, if you're one of those kids that your parents have bought you everything and they love you and you have good grades and you have good friends and you're still just having a hard time, you're sad and you're lonely and you don't feel like anybody loves you and you just don't want to get out of bed. If there's no reason for it, then it could be considered disorder. Now, the different disorders for depression first, major depression we call it. Major depression must last for 3 months or more with no discernible cause. That's what makes it major depression. 3 months of massive depression. Yeah, that's pretty major. That's when somebody says, I suffer from depression, that's what they're referring to. The next one is called dysthymic disorder. Let me spell that for you. D-Y-S-T-H-Y-M-I-C, dysthymic disorder. Dysthymic disorder basically means light depression for a long period of time, low mood for a long period of time. You're not necessarily depressed. You're not crying your eyes out. You're just not happy. You can't get happy. You wish your life, or you wish you felt better, but you don't. It's not a physical thing. It's an emotional thing. It's a low mood. I always like to think of it, let's see if we can do this on the camera. All right, so this is like a normal mood here, and then depression is like way down here, and you're like a little bit up and a little bit down, a little bit up. Dysthymic disorders, here's normal, here's just below that, and you just kind of hang out down at this level. All right, hopefully that worked. All right, the last one is bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder refers to the two poles, which is depressed and manic. Now, let's talk about mania for a second. Depression is easy. We've all suffered from depression. You've all felt bad about things. You've all gone through periods of time as a teenager where for 12 minutes you were super abject depressed and then you got over it. Mania, on the other hand, is probably pretty common, but you don't notice it because it's good. Mania, people who suffer from mania, they don't sleep as much. They're happy. They're go-getters. They're talkative. They're excitable. They feel sexy. There's just like all the really good things in life are all packed into being manic. Now, you technically speaking, there is a disorder called unipolar mania where you're only manic. You go from normal to being manic to normal to being manic. You don't actually go bipolar, which is from depression to mania, depression to mania, which... for those of you probably asking the question, yes, they used to call this in DSM-3. They used to call it manic depression. Now they call it bipolar disorder. So a person who suffers from mania is just going to feel good about life. Everything's good. They're going to be more impulsive, oftentimes. They're going to be more irritable because they don't sleep as much and they're so anxious. They're going all the time. They don't have as much patience with people and they'll get irritable with people. Some people are really angry manics. Other people are just really happy manic. Now, bipolar, what happens is you go manic for a while. Basically, you have too much serotonin. It's like you're on ecstasy. You're just having this great time. Life is wonderful. You couldn't ask for anything more. Then the serotonin basically gets used up and you drop into a depression because the serotonin is gone. And you're down there for a period of time in this abject depressed state. And then you go back up and then you go back down. Now, some people are slightly manic and then slightly depressed. I mean, all of us are to some extent. But we're, once again, going back to the level. We all go up and we all go down a little bit. And we all go up and we all go down a little bit. The problem is when a person goes way up and way down and way up and way down. This is kind of fun to do on the camera. Now, there's 3 types of bipolar disorder. The first type is called a regular cycling bipolar. A person who regularly cycles basically takes a month for them to cycle through from they're normal for a week, and then they're manic for a week, and then they're normal for a week, and then they're depressed for a week, and then they're normal for a week. And it takes about a 4-week period for you to go around the circle. Or from trough to trough or peak to peak. A great example of this is one of my favorite stories called the girl's name. We called her Crazy Christine. Christine was a wonderful person. She was bipolar though, and people who are bipolar can be diagnosed as psychotic. Remember what psychotic is? When you're broken from reality, you can actually have a psychotic break because you're such a different person when you're manic to when you're depressed that you don't see the world the same way, like at all. Like you're in 2 different worlds between the two, so different that it can be considered psychotic. Now, Christine wasn't quite that far, but she had a pretty strong case of bipolar disorder. So when I met her, she was in a manic phase. I didn't know this. I didn't know she was bipolar. I went dancing. It was like my first time ever going dancing. And I see this hot blonde across the dance floor. I'm like, hey, I'm going to go talk to her. So I do a little sidling up next to her. She was actually talking to a friend of mine. And I'm like, hey, you want to dance? And she's like, do you want to dance? I'm like, I have no idea, actually. You want to teach me? And she's like, fine, I'll teach you. So she taught me a couple of moves. We got done dancing. And she's like, so where do you live? And I'm like, oh, right. I'm working this. And I told her, she went, what are the chances? And I went, what are the chances of what? And she went, we live like 4 blocks apart. I'm like, sweet, nice, okay. She's like, let me get your number. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't have to ask. She asked me. And so the next day she calls me. She doesn't wait 48 hours like she should have, or maybe even 72 hours just to play kind of hard to get. No, she calls me the next day. She's like, hey, what are you doing today? I'm like, nothing. And she goes, you want to go sledding? I'm like, yeah, all right. She's like, because me and my cousins want to go sledding. I'm like, your cousins? She's like, oh, don't worry about them. I got 5 really hot female cousins. We're all going to go sledding. I'm like, okay, this might be the luckiest day of my life. So I meet up with them. We go up to Mountain Dale Golf Course. If you guys haven't been sledding up there, missing out. It's awesome. So we go up there. There also happen to be 6 dudes there. But it's okay. So we're all having a good time. We go sledding. We go back to kid whose name's Travis's house. Actually, if you remember the hypnosis lecture, he's the guy that was singing the song under hypnosis. We get back to his place, and we're all flirting with Christine like crazy, and we're kind of ignoring the other girls. And I'm not one to fight for the attention of a lady. And so I kind of step back and watch these guys flirt with her. Another guy comes over, we're talking for a minute, and I'm like, did you notice that kind of everybody's here with Christine? He's like, I noticed that. I'm like, did she invite you? He's like, yeah. He's like, did she invite you? And I'm like, yeah. And I said, where'd you meet her? And he goes, well, I go to the U, and I was just in a hallway in one of the buildings, and I sat down because I had 5 minutes before class, and she walks up to me, and she sits down. She goes, hey, how are you doing? I've seen you around here before. You want to hang out sometime? And just as that's happening, Travis comes over, whose house it was, and he goes, hey, you guys having a good time? We're like, yeah. And we're like, hey, who are you here with? And he's like, Christine invited me. She's pretty hot, huh? And we're like, yeah, she's pretty hot. And we go, where did you meet Christine? And he goes, oh, craziest thing. Okay, so I drive a beer truck. I deliver beer to gas stations or grocery stores. And I actually have to load, by law, in Utah before 6 a.m. because they don't want to actually see the beer comes from someplace here in Utah. So I'm at the store down the road here at like 5:45 in the morning, and I'm loading beers into the refrigerator, and this girl out of nowhere walks up and she just starts talking to me, and I'm like, hey, how you doing? And she was looking good, and she was talking to me, and she's like, hey, you want to hang out sometime? And they're like, so who are you here with? And I go, I actually got invited by Christine too. And they're like, oh, where'd you meet her? I'm like, I met her yesterday dancing. And they're like, oh, okay. And so we all decided right there, funny enough, that we were not going to date her, and we decided to date all of her cousins, which I think all of you've seen A Beautiful Mind at this point. It's the John Nash theory. I actually referenced that, and I said, guys, here's the thing. There's a psychonomist that says what you do is you don't go for the hot blonde. You go for all of her friends, then you all get hooked up. It worked. Travis ended up dating one of her cousins. The other guy ended up marrying one of her cousins. I dated a cousin for a while. It didn't work out. None of us dated Christine. But Christine ended up being our friend, and she was kind of the focal part of this group because everybody ended up dating her cousins. So we'd hang out at her house. One day, Dan, Travis, and I, Dan was the other guy, we all show up at Christine's house to hang out because that was kind of our meeting place. And we get there, and she's nowhere to be found. So we knock on the door, and we don't hear anything. We go inside because we're all supposed to hang out. She's supposed to be there. The door was open. It's not weird like us, breaking into her house or anything. So we go in the house, and we hear music coming from her bedroom. We're like, ooh, okay, because that's not that abnormal for her. But it's like sad, depressing chick music. And we knock on the door, and we're like, hey, Christine, are you in there? Christine, you in there? We don't hear anything. So Travis opens the door slowly, and he leans in, and the lights are out, and she's got these blackout blinds on her windows. And she's got black bedspread on her bed, and she's in bed. And we're like, hey, Christine. And she's like, we're like, hey, what's going on? She's like, and we're like, are you sick? She's like, And so we start talking to her, and after like 20 minutes, we finally get out that she just doesn't feel good, doesn't want to get out of bed. We're like, come on, come get out of bed. Just come hang out. Come watch a movie with us. So we put on like a chick flick. We make some popcorn. We get some ice cream, We're sitting there watching the movie, and she's like, I don't even know why you guys are here. Why are you guys even hanging out with me? this is stupid. I'm going to bed. If you guys want to stay, if you want to go, I don't care. Whatever. She goes back, gets in bed. So that was kind of weird. She does that for a couple of weeks. She doesn't really hang out. We talk to her cousins. They're like, oh, this is normal for her. She just does this sometimes. They don't tell us she's bipolar. They just say, oh, she does this sometimes. After a couple of weeks of not really hearing from her, she calls up. She's like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And I'm like, well, just got done with school for the week. I'm writing a paper. What are you doing? It's good to hear from you. She's like, well, okay, so here's the deal. I lost my job because I didn't go into work. And so I got nothing to do tonight. And she had worked at McGrath's Fish House. She was a waitress there. But her second job, her side job, was that she worked with modeling agencies to set up big events. And they would invite the models to come and be at the events, and then people wanted to be there because there were a bunch of models there. And she's like, so anyhow, I don't have a job. I'm kind of bored, so I decided to have a party. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm thinking it's like all of our friends come and hang out together. That kind of party. No, that's not what kind of party it was. She's like, so anyhow, be here at 6 o'clock at my place. Oh, hi, Savannah.
It's 100. I'm at the 141.
Oh,
and then we're also
okay.
done with it.
I'm in the middle of a lecture. Can you go out and I'll see you in a minute?
I'm done with this
Okay,
book.
good job. Okay, sorry about that. Anyhow, she says, be at my house at 6. And I'm like, okay. Should I bring anything? She's like, no, I got it all taken care of. So I'm like, okay. So I get there at 6. There are cars lined up for 5 blocks down the street. I get to her house. There are 500 people at her house. There are 2 full modeling agencies at her house. She's there, and she is there. She's with everybody. She's got 5 guys following her around, just trying to be in her presence. We've kind of gotten used to this. We've seen this Christine before. But it was the most massive case I've ever seen of a manic phase. She had decided she was going to have a party, and she started calling everybody, and she did it all, and she took care of it, and she's floating around doing this, and that. She spent every dime she had on the party, because it's one of the symptoms of being manic is that you just don't care about money. It's not a thing. You end up spending a lot of money. And flirting with guys. Sexual promiscuity, I guess, is probably a good term to use for somebody in a manic phase. She got angry at one of the guys and slapped him, which is not abnormal. Anyhow, a couple days later, we decided to go dancing. She's like, hey, why don't I drive? I'm like, okay, you can drive because that costs a bunch of money to drive down to dancing and come back. On our way back from dancing, she started telling me about this guy that she'd met, actually, at the party. And I was tired. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I had school the next morning at 8. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to kind of lean my head over here and fall asleep. I fell asleep. The drive from the dance place to my house, where she was going to drop me off, was a half an hour. I woke up as she was turning onto my street. I had fallen asleep like instantaneously. Problem was, she hadn't noticed. She just kept talking for the entire 30 minutes and had not paid any attention to the fact that I was asleep, which is actually a fairly normal behavior when you're manic. Eventually, she went back to normal. Then she went down again and back up, and we got used to Christine being bipolar. All right, there are 2, I know it's going long. There are 2 other types of bipolar. There's slow cycling and rapid cycling. Slow cycling takes months to go through. You'll be up for a month, and then regular for a month, then down for a month, then regular for a month, then up for a month. Long, slow periods of time. It's actually really hard to diagnose because it takes so long. My dad actually suffers from slow cycling bipolar disorder. He was actually so slow that he would cycle with the seasons for most of my life. So in the winter, he was depressed, but he worked construction, so why not be depressed in the winter? You don't have work, you're sitting around the house, it's dark all the time. You might think of it as seasonal affective disorder, which is another disorder in this category where you get depressed when it's winter, or when it's dark outside all the time if you live in Seattle. But he would be depressed in the winter. Then in the spring, he'd be normal. Then in the summer, he'd be super hyper. And then in the fall, he'd be normal. And then he'd be depressed again in the winter. And it was so slow like that we didn't actually get it diagnosed. He was 40 years old before he was diagnosed with slow cycling bipolar disorder. And it explains so much about his behavior once we figured that out. All right. The last one is rapid cycling bipolar. And I'm going to post another YouTube video with this of one of our students who had this. And her friends went and videotaped her, and it's awesome. Rapid cycling, you basically go in minutes. You're all over the place. It's the one that actually is the worst because it's the hardest person to live with because they can be manic, 5 minutes later depressed, 5 minutes later manic, 5 minutes later depressed. You never know you're going to get, and it's the most psychotic seeming and the one that's most likely to be diagnosed as a psychotic disorder. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening for 17 minutes. We'll talk to you later. All right. The next part in our series is dissociative disorders. Dissociative disorders. Now, a dissociative disorder is where your brain disassociates from another part of your brain, from your consciousness. The most common and the easiest to explain, and the one that kind of gives you a foundation for the other dissociative disorders, is dissociative amnesia. Now, you can get amnesia from hitting your head and you forget stuff. You get in a car accident and you forget stuff. That's just a brain damage problem. Dissociative amnesia, on the other hand, is when something traumatic happens to you psychologically, and the way that your brain deals with it is by blocking it out. Freud called it repression. And we do that a lot. There's things that we just don't think about, and we kind of push out of our minds. But dissociative amnesia, you completely forget it. The most common example is somebody is abused, sexually abused as a child, and they'll suffer from dissociative amnesia. They won't remember it. They'll be 30 years old, and one of their brothers or sisters will be like, hey, Dad did this to me, and I know he did it to you. And they're like, no, you didn't. No. And they're like, yeah, people saw it. We know it happened. You could have video evidence. They still wouldn't remember it. But one of the kind of side parts of dissociative amnesia is that they'll kind of move away from even thinking about that memory. The brain will kind of run away from it to avoid it. Which leads us to the second type of dissociative disorder, which is called fugue. Fugue, it's a German word, F-U-G-U-E, fugue, F-U-G-U-E. Now, fugue is a type of dissociative amnesia where you forget who you are. You forget your identity. Your entire who you are is blocked out. But it has this side effect. You run away. Whatever your life was, you run away. And you basically start a new life. Now, if you run away and start a new life because your life sucks, that's just normal. That's just something that some people do. It's a way of coping. Fugue, on the other hand, you don't remember who you are, and your life starts over someplace, and you don't know anything about it. There's a movie, it was done back in the 90s, still a good movie, called A Long Kiss Goodnight, where the main character is suffering from fugue. There was also a TV show called John Doe. I don't know if it's on Netflix or anything. And that character, main character, suffered from fugue. It's not uncommon to do in movies where you don't know who you are, and you're living this life, and it's just kind of going on. One of my favorite stories of this guy named Tom. He was a high-powered executive, and one day he got done with work and told the secretary he was going home, and he never went home. Just disappeared. People thought he was kidnapped or killed, or maybe he just ran off with the secretary, except the secretary came back to work on Monday. Year and a half later, 2 years later, so a while later, one of his colleagues from work was driving through the middle of Ohio, just in the middle of nowhere. The guy's from like Chicago, and stops in this small town to get gas. And this is back in the 70s, early 80s, when people used to pump your gas for you. Some states that do it. And out walks Tom. His shirt says something else, like Dave or something. And he goes, Tom, what are you doing here? And he goes, my name's not Tom. My name is Dave. He's like, no, you're Tom. We worked very closely together for years and years. Obviously, I know who you are. Everybody thinks you're dead, dude. Your wife thinks you're dead. Your kids think you're dead. What are you doing here? He's like, I don't know who you're talking about. Yeah, it was. The same guy. He had a dissociative break, and he had run off, and without knowing that he was running off, because he had no memory of it, because his brain had blocked that memory, he started a new life. All right. The last one, the one that you really want to talk about, because the one you've heard about, it's the one that's cool. DID, dissociative identity disorder. Dissociative identity disorder. Used to be called multiple personality disorder. So what happens in this case is that your brain breaks into different pieces, and each different piece comes up with its own personality. Super, super rare. There's a lot of psychologists who believe it's not even real, that people are faking it, that have it. But it's becoming more and more understood that there's kind of a basic level, and then the kind of more advanced level is maybe not real. The base level is what Herschel Walker suffers from. I don't know if you guys were around when he came to school and talked about this. He actually has a book about it. Herschel Walker, one of the best athletes in all of history. He's very famous for his workout. And his workout was, he did 5,000 push-ups a day. He did 10,000 sit-ups a day. He would run 5 miles at almost a full sprint. as his warm up. He would run sprints. He ended up going to the Olympics as a sprinter. He went as a bobsled pusher. He was the Heisman Trophy winner in college. He was one of the highest paid NFL football players at the time, and with inflation, probably all of history. He could do this because when he played sports, when he worked out, his brain would dissociate and his other personality would kick in. His other personality didn't feel pain. And so he could work out to the point where other people's bodies were ripping apart, but he could push through it. He could do it because his brain would dissociate. It actually went back to when he was a kid and he was bullied. And the way that he would deal with that bullying is that he would go into this other personality that wasn't bothered by the bullying. And there's a great show, great TV show called United States of Terror. It's totally on Netflix. You can totally watch for extra credit. Yes, extra credit. All of the ones I mentioned, by the way, you can watch for extra credit. In United States of Terror, the character just has multiple personalities. They kind of have, they kind of play with a lot. There's another movie called Sybil, which was done in the 70s, about a real case that ended up being found out as fake. But it does show you what dissociative identity disorder is. It can be a lot of different things. That's why people aren't sure if it's a real disorder, because some people say that all their personalities know each other and they talk to each other. Other people say that the personalities don't know each other. Some people believe that it's a person possessed of demons, and there's a bunch of different demons inside of them. Who knows what the reality is? It's probably the most controversial disorder that there is. All right. Any questions? I'm not there to answer. Sorry. Thanks, Ed. Bye. All right. We only have this last major disorder to talk about, and then we have the sexual disorders next. So you have something to look forward to. This one is schizophrenia. Now, you should have all been watching A Beautiful Mind. That movie is wonderful. It shows you so much of a particular type of schizophrenia, and it shows you very specifically each of the specific categories of symptoms you have to have in order to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, first thing to know, schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder. It is the only category of disorder where you break from reality. You no longer live in the world the rest of us live in. Now, there are 4 symptoms that you have to have, and you have to have all 4 in order to be diagnosed as schizophrenic. The level of each one might be different, and what it looks like is going to be completely different depending on the different type of schizophrenia. The first one is delusions. Now, delusions are a belief in things that are not true. Now, we all have delusions. Some of you guys in the room think you're hot. You're not. You're delusional. Some of you girls in the room, you're like, I'm so fat. You're not. You're skinny. You're beautiful. You're wonderful. You're delusional. You think you're fat. Some people think their hair looks good, and it doesn't. Other people think that outfit looks good, and it doesn't. They're delusional. Being delusional is not that abnormal. We all live in a little world that we make up where we have these little delusions that we totally make. Some of you think you're really smart, and you're not. And others of you think you're not very smart, and you have a 4.0 GPA, and that doesn't make any sense. Some of you think you're a great basketball player. We go to Skyline. Sorry. Oh, wait. That was only for the boys. Oh, is it too soon? Anyhow, we all have some delusions. The delusions don't make you schizophrenic. Delusions, along with everything else, and the level of the delusions is what can make you schizophrenic, what goes into schizophrenia. Number 2, hallucinations. Hallucinations are sensory information that is not really there. Your brain is telling you stuff that's not really happening. Some of the examples of this are obviously auditory hallucination. You hear things that aren't there. You hear voices in your head is the most common form of hallucinations, where you can't. We're pretty sure that people with schizophrenia, they're selective attention, where you're talking in your head and you know it's your voice, and then you hear somebody else talking and you can tell that that's somebody else. They lose the ability to differentiate that, and so when they hear a voice in their head, they're not sure if it's theirs or somebody else's, and so they start thinking of somebody else's, and then they start thinking somebody's talking to them. Sometimes it is true auditory hallucinations. Visual hallucinations, they'll see things that aren't really there. They can have taste or touch sensations that aren't really there. Any form of hallucination a person with schizophrenia can have. Number 3 is loss of adaptive behavior. That term maladaptive, this takes it to the next level. Because of the hallucinations, the delusions, they stop behaving appropriately. And they behave in really inappropriate ways. They might start talking to themselves. because they're talking to the voices in their head. They might think they can talk to animals. They might have delusions that they think that they are George Washington. And so they start acting like George Washington. They start talking to Martha Washington. Is that her name? I don't know. And they start dressing like George Washington. And then they can't get a job because they walk in with a little powder wig on and knickers on. Short pants. I don't know what they're called. They lose that adaptive behavior and they can't function in normal society. And the last one is disturbed emotions and speech. So disturbed emotions are when they overreact to things. They'll start crying at the wrong things. Somebody will come and say, hey, you just won the lottery, and they'll start crying, not crying from happiness, literally crying. Or they'll get angry when somebody says, I love you. Or they'll get happy when somebody says that your cat died. Anything like that, where the emotional reaction to things is not at all appropriate for the situation. Once again, we all do that sometimes. You inappropriately laugh when somebody says some bad thing happened to somebody, and you laugh at it because you just don't know. Oh, hi, Ethan. Can you go out? I am videotaping this, and you don't have your shirt on in the background, and that's going to my class. Sorry about that. Anyhow, we have disturbed emotions sometimes. It's when you do it quite often, and you do it to really inappropriately. So with those 4 things, there are 4 types of schizophrenia. The first one is paranoid schizophrenia. It's the one that we've all heard of. It's the one they like to make movies about. There's tons of movies about paranoid schizophrenics. Lots and lots of serial killer movies. Lots and lots of movies, where people are running away from the government. And that's what John Nash had in It's A Beautiful Mind. So paranoid schizophrenics, the number one thing that you see is paranoia. They are super, super paranoid that people are out to get them. A lot of times it manifests as the aliens are out to get them, or the government is out to get them, or specific people, or clandestine services, or some other country is out to get them. But they're paranoid about things. Sometimes it's paranoia about like animals or something, like spiders are going to crawl in their house and get them or something like that. That's type 1. Type 2 is called catatonic schizophrenia. A person who's catatonic doesn't interact with the world. They're catatonic. They just lay there, or they'll just sit there. Basically what's happened is that they've lost their adaptive behavior to the point where they have a little world inside of their head, and they live in that little world, and they don't interact with the world. I used to work at the Utah Training School, which is it's down in American Fork, and it's people who have disorders. They go there and they try and get treatment. It's not the mental hospital. The mental hospital is for people who are in danger to themselves or others. The training school is just people who have disorders and can't be taken care of in a group home or in any other setting. There was a patient there, and they would wheel her in. They would get her out of her bed, put her in a wheelchair, wheel her up to a window. It was a floor-to-ceiling window that looked outside at a garden. And they would just wheel her up to the window, and they just leave her there all day. And she'd just sit there and look out the window. And I'd go up and I'd talk to her, and I was very young when I was there. And I didn't know why she wouldn't talk. But she was just there. She'd just look out the window. And, sorry, my kids just snuck in the room, but they're hiding here because they want to be near their dad. She'd just sit there all day long and not talk, not look, not interact. But she was a catatonic schizophrenic. All right, the next is a disorganized schizophrenic. Disorganized schizophrenic doesn't show specific paranoid behavior. They're not catatonic. They're really strong 2 things are the disturbed emotions and the loss of adaptive behavior. So I knew 2 disorganized schizophrenics. One was named Dave. Dave and Todd actually worked together. So a little background here. My aunt ran group homes for schizophrenics for a long time. There are a number of them around the valley. If you want to get a job, talk to me. She still has hookups, and it's a really cool job. You get paid for watching people who have disorders, making sure they don't hurt themselves or others. You get paid pretty good for it, and mostly you just hang out with them so you can do homework, and you can actually get paid to sleep on the job. So Dave, one day, I'm over at the house, and he was watching the jazz game. He loved the jazz. His mom, who had some money, had bought him a big screen TV so he could watch the Jazz. Well, Todd, one of the other guys in the house, walked in front of him as John Stockton hit the game-winning shot. Dave flipped out. He flipped out to the point where he threw the TV out the front window. He then threw the couch out the front window. He went and grabbed the microwave, threw it out the front window. We had all kind of escaped outside. We were standing outside while Dave freaked out. He wasn't even clear on why he was freaking out, except that he missed the shot. It's a totally inappropriate thing to do, totally disturbed emotions, total loss of adaptive behavior, kind of delusional in terms of how bad what it was had happened. He only lived in his own little world. After about 45 minutes, he calmed down, went outside, sat on the couch on the porch where the couch ended up after he threw it out the window, and asked everybody what was going on, if we're going to have ice cream. Todd, he's my favorite. My favorite story. Probably one of my favorite stories I'll ever tell you guys. Todd had a crush on one of the girls that worked at this group home. And he would do inappropriate things and say inappropriate things to her because he had a loss of that behavior. Dudes, you don't tell girls about your fantasies about them, because then you're a creep, and then they slap you, punch you, kick you, and you just don't do it. You have that adaptive behavior. You know better. Todd didn't have that. So he would go up to this girl and he would tell her the things that he would fantasize about her, just graphically. He'd ask her if she wanted to, right then. Things like that. She would just laugh it off because, he was one of the clients that lived in the home, and her job was to make sure that he was taken care of. And, she just kind of laughed it off. Well, one day, Todd came up to her when she came on shift, and he's like, can we go buy a baseball bat? And she goes, baseball bat? He's like, yeah, I want to go to the mall, and I want to go to the sporting goods, and I want to buy a baseball bat. And she's like, why do you want a baseball bat? He's like, well, okay, so here's the thing. So the other day when I asked you if you wanted to, and she went, yes, and that was inappropriate. He's like, I know it was inappropriate. I can't believe you said that. Oh, hi, honey.
Hi.
Oh, that's why he's supposed to go to bed, and he's not going to bed. And so he's now being dragged out of the room. So anyhow, back to the story. So Todd says, when I asked you that and you said no, that made me mad. And she went, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I made you mad. He's like, did you change your mind? She's like, no, that's inappropriate, and I can't do that because I work here. He's like, yeah, so I've been thinking about it, and I've decided I'm going to kill you. And the girl goes, what? And he goes, I'm going to kill you with a baseball bat. I'm going to beat your brains in with a baseball bat. And she goes, you want to kill me? He's like, yeah, you didn't want to with me, and so I'm going to kill you. And she goes, but you love me. He's like, yes, I do love you, but I have to kill you. And she goes, well, then no, we can't go to the mall because I can't buy you a baseball bat because then you'd kill me. And he goes, please, please, oh, please, oh, please. And I'm sitting here, I'm like 10 feet away from this, watching this. Just, my eyes are about to pop out of my head. My brain's about to explode. I can't believe this conversation is actually happening. He asked her every day for 4 weeks if they could go to the store. He would beg her, he would plead, he would pronounce his undying love for her if she would take him to the store. And every time she'd say, why do you want to go to the store? He'd say, so I can buy a baseball bat. Why do you want to buy a baseball bat? So I can kill you with it. One day he just forgot about it. It stopped happening. That's disturbed emotions. Totally inappropriate emotional reaction to the situation. Yes, maybe he wants to kill her. You don't beg, borrow, plead. Treat somebody really, really nice and ask them really nicely if you can have them help you to kill them. Anyhow, hopefully that helps with schizophrenia. Hopefully you had a good time. Hopefully you did well on the assignment on schizophrenia. If you haven't done the assignment yet, it's to watch the movie A Beautiful Mind and then to list all of the symptoms of schizophrenia that he had in the movie. So all the stuff we just talked about here for the last 13 minutes, you take that and put it together of how that applied to the movie and how the movie applied to schizophrenia. Thanks, guys.